Welcome back to the Drunk Turkey Show. I'm Daniel, and today we are going back into the Delphi case, a case that is present. It's in the news right now. The state has rested their case at this point, and the defense has called a couple of witnesses. Some things have kind of gone down, and we're going to talk about those things. We're going to talk about also, some forensic stuff with our good friend Steve from True Crime Web. What's up, Steve? Welcome back to the show. How's it going, my man?
Absolutely. Doing wonderful. Thank you. It's an honor to be here, sir.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I appreciate you being here. Thank you again. It's an honor to have somebody with your expertise and somebody who has done the experiments that you have done to kind of give a visual and an understanding to those who may not understand all the way, which includes myself, and a better idea of what the evidence looks like and how it is. But before we get into the forensic stuff, what are your thoughts so far as do you think the state has done a good job? Without going into specifics, just kind of overview, do you think the state has done a good job thus far?
They've had a couple of key moments. Overall, am I disappointed in some of the investigations and some of the questions and some of the shortcomings? Absolutely. There's always room for improvement. Been there myself. There's no case I ever worked that I couldn't have improved upon certain things I did. When we see that with this case also.
I agree. I think that in this case, there was, like, as you mentioned, there was maybe some things that could have been done a little bit better. I think of, for one, leaving the sticks at the scene, the ones that were on top of the bodies, and going back a couple of days to go pick those up. I think that was a huge mistake. But does that mean that Richard Allen is innocent? Not necessarily. I know that, for instance, and we'll get a little bit into some like DNA stuff. Richard Allen's DNA wasn't found at the scene, but it doesn't appear that anybody else's outside of those that can be explained hadn't been brought up either. Is that correct?
Yes. And also, while we're speaking about some of the shortcomings of the investigation, actually one of the strongest pieces of investigation that will benefit the prosecution was in the shortcomings of their investigation regarding the white van, that they failed to do something critical as far as questioning that individual, that driver, what vehicle, because it's not in the record. And so it became an unknown. Whereas if it had been part of the record early on, that it's so ironic that part of the law enforcement failure to follow through and get good information is so critical now. Just one of those little unexpected turns.
Well, they missed a lot back then, including Richard Allen's own statement at that time that he was there at the scenes.
Yeah, they had like I said, it's not that will be used in training. Absolutely. And it should be used in training. Don't do this. This is what will get you. You don't want to be on the stand being asked certain questions and being looked at as failures of your investigation.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. I mean, that entire department, the state law enforcement entity, all those guys are being really scrutinized at this time for the mistakes that they made back then. And I think also when it comes to something with when there's like time that's been done, even though it's not like a significant long time, it's about 5 years, but technology has come so far, and standard operations and procedures have gotten so far since then as well. They're nowhere near the same. And so something that obviously something that may look obvious today may not have been so obvious back then. So we do have to keep that with a grain of salt. But going into this, there was a confession. There was a few confessions. One of the confessions was that Richard Allen had utilized a box cutter from his work to have committed this crime. And in the testimony, one of the biggest issues I think that has been populated or brought up by the defense team is that at one point the expert for the prosecution thought it was a serrated blade, and then it wasn't until later that he thought it was a box cutter. What do you feel about that information, and knowing what you know, like, and we'll bring these up.
Yeah.
Do you think that that was just a simple mistake to have thought it was a serrated thing, or is it something that maybe is more common than not?
Well, there's a lot of things that when you're looking at a case and you're analyzing and trying to determine, I mean, it's not easy. It's not like on TV where you instantly have this um, uh, brilliant thought process or recognition of what something is instantly. That
Mhm.
and that's where a lot of my CSI testing that I do, such as I did with this case, looking at serrated edges versus straight edges, and then into the box cutters. Once that became a part of the storyline, that trying to figure that out, and we see that the pathologist, he was at home when he realized that, well, maybe those marks were from a um, thumb slide of a box cutter. And of course, I was doing my testing, trying to determine. And through that testing, of course, you draw certain thoughts, and that even as you're testing this, and of course, I can't cut myself. Well, I can, and I have it in the past while doing tests, injured myself, but it's not like you can go in and recreate these tests on a human subject. And of course, I had to use something that is often used as far as comparative as skin texture, hair follicles, meat or bone, and muscle tissues. Is I used part of a pig, specifically in this instant ham hocks, to recreate some of these injuries that
Mhm.
were described um, by the pathologists, and of course other YouTubers that went out there. There was one of them that had a artist that was present in the courtroom that drawed out certain things, and so with that in mind is how I went out and tried to recreate. And during those recreations, I saw a lot of things that I have seen in the during autopsies,
Mhm.
and some of that I chose not to share. And you've seen those images, and you
Mhm.
understand why some of those probably shouldn't be shared. And
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you on that one. So, yeah, I've seen a lot of the images that we're gonna be going through. We're gonna miss quite a few of them, not because they're anything well, it's because of the angles. You can't really tell that it's pig, and somebody could interpret this as something else. And it's it's probably something that we don't need to see on this type of podcast as far as the gruesomeness to the
yeah,
cuts. But we will look at certain other things that are kind of sort of um, go along with it. And so you
yes,
have a couple of box cutters here presented.
yeah,
I think the other angle was
yeah,
um,
and, yeah.
a little bit better.
And I went out and purchased different types of blades, and one of the follow-up slides has all the different blades I used. But I had the cheap breakaway, very flimsy top two box cutters. One of them's pretty hefty. That top blade, um, um,
Hmm.
that you can extend it out to almost like a 4 or 5 inch blade. And the one right under it is more of a pencil size. While I was experimenting with those top two blades, it
Hmm.
was a very risky, very flimsy type of instrument. It's not something I would choose, as far as that. If I knew I was going to go and commit some type of homicide and be for uh, trying to inflict certain injuries, it wouldn't be my choice unless it was part of some fantasy um, or or something I had envisioned as far as placing fear into victims. Um, the bottom two uh, box cutters are almost knife-like, but
Hmm.
even when I was testing with those, they only allow on the test subject as far as the the hog parts I was working with, allowing that tissue and that bone or the tissue and the muscle to get to body temperature or getting warm, that's very placid and very elastic, that those cuts are extremely shallow. And when we hear the pathologist talks about shallow cuts, I can see where that would fall into the storyline of a box cutter.
That makes sense. And now, I know you say that the box cutter wouldn't be your first choice. Now, one of the confessions was that the murders were unplanned. It was supposed to be a assault, and then he got scared and ended up committing and taking their lives. He had a weapon with him, a gun, and so I think that was his weapon of choice there. He said that it was his work box cutter. So if those things are true, then I'm assuming it's probably the lesser expensive type of box cutter. And I'm assuming that maybe the reason why he used it was because he had it on his person for maybe being, at work. But and those things do make sense. I mean, the Google searches as well kind of lead you to believe that there was a kind of a sick fantasy going on in his head as well.
Oh, absolutely. Now, if people that are, excuse me, as I get this out, the members of my channel, I carry a box cutter 24/7. When I get up, and it's in my pocket always. I just like carrying one over a knife. Some people, and he may have that same thought process, especially if he uses that in line of work. I just like that those blades are interchangeable, and I even sharpen my own blades on my box cutters. But some people carry box cutters all the time. I'm one of them. I used to work at a food pantry, got used to it, and it became part of my life. These are the different blades that you can have for a box cutter.
Yes, sir. And so they do come with serrated blades as well,
Yes.
as I can see. Now,
Yes.
I mean, I don't know, but I would assume that just the normal utility one would probably be involved in a free
Yeah,
employee
that's the one
box
I
cutter.
normally carry. That's one I have. That's one I use all the time.
Yeah.
The only reason I have the serrated and the carpet blades and the hook blades now is just for this testing. I went out and acquired them just for this testing that I did um, when I started looking at the different types of injuries and how useful they would be, or what type of injuries could they inflict, and would you expect them to break? And they
Right.
are pretty flimsy.
Well, I think when it comes to the wounds that were inflicted, it seems like Abby didn't have very many. Libby had a few more, but as you mentioned, they were shallow. Um, it doesn't seem like there was a lot of like for instance in the Brian Koberger case, we heard there's a lot of ferocity in that case with one of the victims where you could tell that there was apparently supposedly uh, a difference in how the wounds were made because of the ferocity of the assailant. In this one, it didn't seem like that was the case. Now I know there's been a lot of people that have questioned, and I'll bring this up to you right now while we have this here, is it didn't appear that any of them, or at least Abby, didn't fight back. uh what do you think about that when that is being said? I know I saw your show earlier this week and you had a comment about a person's natural instinct, but
Yeah.
in this case there's no sign of
Yeah.
like bondage or anything. So what do you think happened here?
Well, even when we look at the other CSI expert that was brought into it, he thought it was extremely odd, and he gave three different scenarios,
Hmm.
and or possibilities. And I'm the same way. I mean, we're looking, while could fear have played, and they've frozen deer in the headlight type of scenario? Absolutely possible. But I also look at from things of understanding, and like I said, it's all speculation. That's all we're all doing, is that we're looking at someone that law enforcement since day one said that Libby had the courage to go and start her video of BG, even
Hmm.
that he was approaching, that she faced that threat and reacted. She did something. So we have an individual that, while even in the face of fear of some unknown coming, that she starts doing something.
Hmm.
And then, of course, she's an athlete, and as we all know, athletes typically, they're placed in those high um, um, adrenaline filled moments, and they react, and so could it be fear? Absolutely. But do I think so? No. I believe that just personally, I believe that there was some type of either restraints used. Was it possibly clothing or something of that nature? Yes. Um, because it's so simple and so easy that of all the crime scenes I've been to and all the injuries I've seen, I don't think I've ever seen where, and I've seen both male and female in one crime scene, and both of them have defensive injuries of trying to, in those survival instinct moments. But those were older. I've never had to work a homicide of a child being attacked by an edged weapon. And so I'm having to speculate on that. And I hate for that part of it, but I still think that there's that survival stuff. And that's just my personal opinion.
Right. No, yeah, and I agree with you as well. You know, the defensive wounds it's odd that there aren't there, or there isn't any type of struggle for survival or anything that you can see. And to me, I don't know, and you're absolutely right. It's speculation on everybody's part, but I thought maybe there was a chance that maybe, because I think for like Abby, she basically bled out, correct?
From my understanding, correct. And that it happened at a certain point, that, that she wasn't moved from the time that those injuries. It was almost as if she was already fully dressed. That was the location. That's where it happened. Nothing else happened at that point. Now, do we know that were they able to establish which victim was first and what injuries occurred first? Through proper investigations, you would expect so, because there's certain body fluids and blood mixtures that like we would have had at Kohlberger,
Right.
that of establishing who's first, who's second, third, and fourth. But in this case, who's first and who's second. And we just don't. We only have limited information from this crime scene, even in the testimony, due to that it not being televised, which
Right.
is unbelievable and so sad for our society, because we should be able to see this.
No, I agree. I 100% agree with that. It should be a fair trial for everybody to see that the trial is being ran fairly. It does bring up question when there's certain secrecy on certain things that aren't commonly shut down. In fact, I was speaking to another YouTuber about this, and I think I was, from what I remember in that conversation, he had mentioned that Judge Gold had pushed something or proved something to allow cameras in Indiana court, and this case comes along first, and she pulls them away. So, on that, that's interesting. I don't think that's any sign of a cover up or anything like that, but it is odd. It is odd. But going back to the cuts here, the doctor here, he didn't find out about the box cutting thing, or the box cutter possibly. Oh, you know what? I remember where I was at. I apologize. I lost where I was. So, is it possible that the adrenaline with Abby, maybe she wasn't really aware that she got hit? I mean, I'm not certain if that's a very painful way to go. I'm sure that there is some. I've never cut myself, so I don't know. But is it possible that during the adrenaline, she may not even have known she was cut?
Absolutely. I can tell you this. I've been cursed with high pain tolerance. Mrs. Steve, she's had to clean up this house, our residences. I've come in and I've absolutely cut myself and not know it, and not with something as sharp. And a lot of us can recognize or see when we've hurt ourselves, especially if you have high pain tolerance, and not know that you're cut or you're bleeding. Could that have happened here? Absolutely. The adrenaline of the fight, we see that what if they were, but what if we have the adrenaline of the fight or flight or whatever's going on, that she may not have known of her injuries. And then by the time she recognized it, it was too late, due to her blood pressure dropping to a certain level. Just don't know. There's a lot of things, a lot of variables that have to be considered that the crime scene guys would recognize. But not having Abby's blood flow pattern for me to see, of knowing exactly what her body position was and those flow patterns and directions of injuries and where what was the depth at the start of the injury and the depth at the end of the injury. Which way did it go? And I mean, there's so much to consider when you're looking at a crime scene.
Yeah, for sure. And that was just one of the things that kind of bothered me, because I think that it was also brought up in court that she had tears, and so she was likely alive through a lot of it. And just sad, and it's so disheartening to talk about, especially when it's a young child or two young children. But going back to the cuts now, if you were to have seen the cut, and do you think it's easily mistakable to confuse a serrated knife with maybe perhaps the thumb guard of a box cutter? There is that something that obviously side by side you can tell the difference, but in those scenarios where you only have those cuts in front of you, is it something that could be a common mistake?
Well, with limited information I have, I see nothing. I can't figure out when he says it's the thumb slide of a box cutter. And I did that. I went and I created an injury with the thumb slide. The only way you could get where it would appear to be serrated is that you create that injury prior to a cut, and then you cut through where that thumb slide had come in contact with. That would give you that possibility. But otherwise, no, I don't see. And like I said, I don't have firsthand possession of those first generation photos of where I could analyze what he's speaking of. It makes no sense to me that he thinks it's because a thumb, as you can look at the box cutters, all of them, the thumb slide is not part of the blade. It's not near the blade. It's because you can't have it near the blade or you cut your thumb. And so they're typically on the back or on the side. They're away from where the blade is. When the blade's inserted, the thumb slide is not part of it. And when you look at some of these cuts, and which we looked at off of prior to the show, that with that skin cutting, that there's a vast amount of difference between what the thumb slide contact injury was and what the serrated cut of skin and muscle looked like. Two different things.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's going to be a problem, don't you think? When it comes to, well, let's look at this picture here. Maybe this will help us. So if it was one of these type, could this here be what he's referring to?
It would have to be something else. Yes. And that's the only thing I could see. And I did that actually in one of those tests where we looked at with the stab injuries. I fully retracted the blade and I struck the skin of the muscle or the bone and ham hock that I was working with, and with that to create a small injury. But it was nothing like when I cut the skin and the muscle tissue of what the serrated edge looked like. I think that if it was truly serrated, my understanding of being able to go in there and look at it with magnifiers or a microscope, and that's what I did. I blowed it up and look at it through those lab, or what I have in my lab, to show those cuts and blow them up for comparative value. Yes. The stab, you see the top two stabs are with the blade. The bottom stab to the left, the furthest one that you see stab, that's with that guard that you just showed. That with the blade was fully retracted, that's what you would get if you just stab that blunt part
Mm.
into the skin.
It does look a little different. I wouldn't say that it looks like serrated.
No, it doesn't. And that's what I was saying about the thumb slide abrasion down on the bottom. That if you did that and then you applied a cut inside of that, then yes, you could say, oh, that might be serrated. See what I'm saying? If you had a thumb slide abrasion prior to a stab, but the stab went through the same area, then you might be able to say, but what are the odds of that? Anything's possible, but I just found it because like I said, now to create that thumb slide abrasion took a lot of force. I had to absolutely turn the retract the blade and hit it with a great amount of force to create that type of injury to the skin.
Yeah. And I would expect that in that moment, if the confession is true, so the confession goes that he saw a white vehicle, a white van passing by, he got scared, they crossed the river, and instead of doing what he had planned to do, he ended up taking their lives out of fear. He's going to be probably, not being very precise. He's going to be in a moment of panic. And so I would expect a lot of force on some of these because he's not trying to be precise. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, but when I created that thumb slide abrasion, and it was from the bottom of all the, which I've got pictures of the thumb slide that created this side by side comparison. Whenever you look through that you'll see which one of them. But I had to take it and hold it in a position that is not natural to hold a box cutter. I had to flip the box cutter upside down to create this injury.
Well, that's odd.
Yeah, because normally the thumb slide abrasion is absolutely opposite of the victim. It's towards it's upward, and for you, but that doesn't mean that he wasn't behind them.
That's what I was going to ask you.
And pulling into them to create this. That's a possibility, but it's not something that that you would think as far as striking out. If he's behind them and pulling into them, yes, that could have created. And this here is the side by side of. I went in and ran it through some filters to highlight what that thumb slide would, as far as abrasion, look like. But then you would still have to, if there's a cut associated with that, it would have to be through that same pattern for them to appear on top of each other.
Right. Well, I mean, I thought that most likely, especially if they're trying to get away from him, because I think that there was signs of like shoes falling off on their way through the water and onto the other side. Now, obviously, those could have been taken off and thrown, but from what I understand, those may have came off during the process of getting out. Maybe there was a moment where they ran or tried to get away and he came from behind. But do you think this is troublesome for the prosecution that as far as this goes, because I don't think they can 100% say that it was from a box cutter, correct?
No, no, I don't think they can either, because and that's the reason I went into trying to figure it out, of doing these tests. Whenever I see certain things, that how difficult is it to see if it's a serrated edge? If it was a serrated edge, and that's the thing that leads me to believe it wasn't a serrated edge, because even when you or if it was a serrated edge, they have evidence of that in the photographs, or you should, because every cut I made, you can tell between a straight blade and a serrated blade. That if you go in there and you look at it under a microscope, they create two different types of cuts. As you pull through the skin and pull through the muscle, that you'll see that wave pattern, which I doubt that you'll be able to show in tonight's presentation, because
no, we we're only going to go a few more slides before we stop, before some other stuff comes up in here. But yeah, for me, I think that if the state is trying to say that this confession is accurate and that this matches what was found at the scene, I think that could be a problem if they can't really say and prove this is why we believe it's this. If they're looking at this and saying, hey, this looks like it's serrated at one point, but we thought it was the thumb guard. The defense is going to bring up their expert, I'm sure of it, at some point, and talk about how it's not from a box cutter. And what do you think their plan of action as to what they're going to say it is? What would you combat that as?
Well, I think they're just going to highlight that the state has no idea what they're doing. They can't even identify the weapon, so how can they even identify the suspect? I think that's. I think they're going to say that the state's lost his last year's Easter egg. They just don't know what they're doing. They don't know. They don't even have the right individual, so they don't even have the right weapon. Identify the weapon, and then you'll identify the offender. Is that what they're going to play upon? Possible. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's possible. Let me see. Let me pull this real quick. Yeah. And we're going to go to the last one now. And here it is. So this is a straight, and this is the serrated. And
Yes.
I'm assuming this is what you're seeing under like a microscope or very
Yes.
close up.
Yes. And this, of course, is with pig skin. And you can see the difference between what a straight edge is versus serrated. And you can see the wave pattern on the right. And I've noticed that even when you go to the looking at it with some of the slides that I made in Play-Doh or clay, that straight edge doesn't have the ripping and tearing that a serrated edge does in that drier material, which isn't comparable to skin. But when I went into skin, the serrated edge created this. And I've done this. I think I did it with both knives. I did a few months ago where I used a straight edge knife and a serrated blade knife, and of course didn't do the box cutters, but the similar results, both of them absolutely similar.
I'm not a trained expert in any of this, but that serrated one looks like it's chewed up. So I would assume that if you saw some sort of waviness in the injuries, I can see how somebody would have thought that it would have been from a serrated edge blade. I think that if he was still thinking about it later and it was brought up on his, while he was, doing something with a box cutter, tells me he was probably unsure even when he said it was serrated, because he was continuing to think about it.
In that one slide that we were discussing earlier, it was more of what you would see with defensive injuries. There's one cut that was made with a straight edge that did create one wave of where it was overlapping near the edge of another cut. But it wasn't the consistent that we have in this one. You have multiple hills and valleys showing the outline of the serrated cut. But in those defensive injury slide that I made, and that was with a straight edge, there's just one wave in it of where the skin kind of turned as the blade was being drawn through, that created one wave, but it was nothing that while it may take you a second to look at it and then think, oh, okay, this is what happened. It's totally different than what this wave pattern with the serrated is.
Gotcha. And so, yeah, I mean, it's interesting. And I hope that what kind of understanding do you think that the jury is going to have on this? Obviously, they're going to bring up their experts. They're going to ask some questions. I know in this case, the jury is able to ask the questions of the person that's the witness that's on the stand. But at the end of the day, when they're going in for deliberations and stuff, if they had questions about this and wanted to go back and ask something about this specific stuff here. How would that work? Are you familiar with that, if at all?
Yeah, they may go back and address, well, what type of, they may have a question about the weapon there. And of course, weapon doesn't have, how many homicides have been committed throughout history where the weapon is never found? Doesn't even matter if it's a firearm that was tossed or a knife. We have the same thing with Kohlberger. We may have the sheath, but we don't have the knife.
Mm-hmm.
And while we may have a more likely of exactly what weapon it was, is it necessary that they identify this weapon? No. But will it be brought up? Probably so. But the questions from the jurors, and they've asked some excellent questions, and they seem to have not asked about this, and that's passed. So I don't think we're going to get anything as far as the weapon.
Got you. Understood. Yeah, because yeah, I think that, like, for instance, the confession about the box cutter stuff, right? Even at that, he mentioned that later after the doctor or the pathologist that came back thinking that it was possibly from a box cutter. Is that correct?
I can't remember the timeline on it.
Okay.
I do so much stuff that
No, yeah, I think that was the case in this situation, and there's quite a few confessions, some that maybe necessarily don't make sense, maybe some that don't make sense because of the perspective. Like, for instance, I think one of them was that he took the lives of his family and his kids or something of that nature. um and then I saw like a little bit more of what that quote was, and it seemed like their lives were already over and killed because of what they're going through, not necessarily because that's what he did to them physically. Kind of similar to where the it doesn't matter, it's over anyway, or whatever the case would have been. You know, just on that alone, it kind of sounded like he was confessing. And when you hear further detail in it, where he talks about everybody's going to think it's me, my life is over anyways, it doesn't matter. My neighbors,
yeah.
you talk to them. So it doesn't really sound as much of a confession once you hear the full context of the entire thing. Um, so with that being said, where are you on the false confessions that don't make sense, aren't real? I don't think that's an indication that just because somebody's lying on these other, stuff, that they'd be completely lying on everything. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, I don't know. I mean, all of us have been under the influence of alcohol or drugs. Or most of us have. Not all of us, but
Uh-huh.
most of us at some time, and we've made weird statements and spoken out of our heads
Yeah.
and about strange things. And could some of those be that? Yes, that he's in a dream state. Absolutely. Like I said, that's for people of a higher pay grade that have a better understanding of psychology, psychiatry, of
Mhm.
of what the influences of drugs and alcohol, and are we in what reality and what level of awareness is he at those moments, and what is the basis for that? I mean, I've had some pretty weird dreams myself at times, and but and were all those dreams true? No. Um, and so while
Right.
every statement was, and he was under drugs at some point, but that doesn't mean that while certain things may be untrue, that everything he says is untrue. Um,
Right.
and the only two things of his statements that I believe tell a story as far as in of him being complicit is the white van, and then when he speaks to his mother.
Right.
While uh, you would lie to a loved one of not being involved, but telling them that you're involved, that's is something that
Yeah, and I
I
think a
would.
lot of people are also getting confused, thinking that there was 61 false statements
Mhm.
and that there was only like two or three that were real. It's not the case. Not the case at all. He had a few that were false, and a lot of them didn't say anything specific to the case, other than just "I did it." I committed it. I took their lives. I want to confess to this. And so a lot of folks are confusing the handful that are completely maybe out of left field with the majority of the confessions that he made. Majority of them were just that he did it. Now, he had one or two that something about grandkids and stuff.
And something people need to understand is that when law enforcement does get a confession, sometimes it's after that individual is telling their story with their narrative and their agenda, and they tell lies within their final confession, that they may have 50 different lies before they get to the final, yes, this is what happened. This is how it occurred. This is where it is. And so even in one confession, you can have multiple lies and multiple storylines of where they hint at, or they're trying to put their spin of what happened, that the gun went off accidentally or whatever. Or, and then eventually, no, I pulled the trigger intentionally and all this other stuff.
Right. And he wouldn't be, if he's end up found guilty and end up, because right now everything is allegedly, because he hasn't been convicted. But if he ends up being convicted of this crime, gosh, man, where was I going with that? There was a comment there that caught my eye, and it just kind of went by me so quickly.
It gets worse as you get older.
Yeah. What was the untrue? Oh man, I wrote something in that. Why was it untrue? Okay, yeah. So he wouldn't be the first person that would make up lies or have false, confessions about cases that he has no responsibility in. In fact, I wish Jaime was here, because he was referring to this one person who took in the lives of multiple people, and and what he had mentioned was that he was somewhat friendly with the cops. He'd go in there. He would confess to a bunch of different crimes and a bunch of different stuff that ended up not being true, fake murders, fake things that weren't happening. And then all of a sudden,
is that the Lucas and that law enforcement across the country went to? And he confessed to hundreds and hundreds. And finally, they discovered that some of those cases would have occurred hundreds of miles apart at the same time. And if that's the same,
I think so. It might be. And this guy would confess. And so because he confessed to so many, he wasn't that he was looked at on a couple of them, but they had to take a second look because of how many times he had falsely made fake confessions. I mean, if it was that easy, Brian Koberger could just go in there tomorrow and say, "Hey, I want to confess that I shot all the four people in the house." Yes. And then the next day say, I also did this and this and this and this and that. That's not part of the case. Are we just to say, "Oh, hey, he confessed about wrong things, so he must not have done it"? I don't think that goes the same way.
Yeah.
Now, there's the defense's argument when it comes to the confessions is the living conditions of Richard Allen. I've seen some pictures. I don't know how accurate they are. I don't know where they come from, but there was one that had a picture of a cup with some pretty dark water, claiming this was the water they had to drink. There were ceiling tiles in the middle of the hallway that were missing. I'm not even positive if this is the correct jail, but they look kind of rough. What do you think about? Do you think that the defense has a leg to stand on when it comes to the confessions and his possible mental health issues at the time of those confessions?
Well, our standard of housing and how inmates are handled and the guidelines that they're put in, while a lot of people say, well, he's in isolation, he's in a hole, it's not of what we see in our world of horror movies and where we have interactions. He's seeing someone. It's not of what, that he's in this unlit dark hole with no human interactions. And of what we will have seen a few generations ago in law enforcement. When I first started in law enforcement, our correctional and jail facilities even the good cells would have been nightmares compared to what inmates are exposed to, and currently. And that's only occurred in the last 20 or 30 years. The old jail systems were, and if just those conditions would lead you to confessing, it never worked back then.
It still don't work now.
Yeah. And because if it did, everybody would have confessed, because the conditions at that time, it was just part of what was part of society and how the jails were built and the facilities that they could have, and what they were exposed to. The inmates now, it's not, like I said, you can't tell the difference between a county jail and a state prison cell. And there's certain qualities, and of course, I'm going to get a lot of heat on that it's a prison, it's a prison, it's a prison. There's still the Constitution, and there's standards, and there's medical, that there's certain things even in the prison that for long-term inmates, it's better to be in a prison than in some county where all you'll get is some dentist that'll pull your teeth and some doctor that'll give you an aspirin.
Right. No, I agree. And some of the complaints were contradictory and hypocritical. Like, for instance, they were saying that he had no rec time with the boys. He couldn't go play basketball. And at the same time, they were complaining that those same dudes were calling him a baby killer. And, I just didn't understand the argument there that, oh, he's in a cage when everybody else gets to associate with each other. He's not allowed to associate with anybody. But that's for his protection. I don't think people understand that when somebody is accused of a crime like what he's accused of committing with these little girls, they don't become like, superstars or president of the prison club or anything like that. They're not well liked, even amongst, the jail system. Those that, commit crimes against children are looked down upon.
Well, I would never want to go to prison, but if you sent me to prison, put me in isolation, put me where he is. Don't put me in general population, because there's a lot of bad things that happen in general population. I mean, it's a society, and isolation is, and like I said, it's not what people can easily. It's easy to say what isolation and imagine what isolation means to individuals that are not part of the prison system, but those that have worked in it, live in it, see it day in and day out, it's it's just totally different than what is portrayed in movies.
Right, exactly. And then, some of the other complaints were that, his lights never turned off. Well, obviously, they have to be able to see that he's inside there when they do their checks.
I never worked in a jail yet that the lights were turned off.
Neither, I've never seen it either.
Yeah, it's not snugly bedtime night lights.
Right. Exactly.
There's a reason you have to. Nobody sleeps in total darkness. They don't even sleep in really very low light conditions. I mean, you have to do head counts. I started my career off as a jailer, and we had to have those head counts. There was never, you didn't go back in there with a flashlight. The lights were on.
Yeah.
They were never, in a position that they slept in where your eyes couldn't easily identify that's a human form there. And that's, we can see the facial features to identify or a human part. We got to see a foot. We don't just see clothing, and we don't see a boot. We got to see human.
Right. And, I'm going to bring this up. I have the other one starred, but is jail life different than prison life? The problem is it's not about whether it's jail life or prison life. It's about having him safe and being able to attend trial. The city of Delphi is not the largest place in the world. And I would assume that their facility probably isn't equipped to house somebody on watch to protect them against their own self. And, I think that if he was in, a regular jail and he somehow Epsteined himself, then everybody would be complaining about that as well. Like, oh, how did you not put him in a place where they could watch him 24/7, where they could have an armed guard outside? So at the end of the day, with some folks, it's damned if you do, damned if you don't when it comes to law enforcement. The mere fact that they exist is a problem. And the mere fact that if they don't show up on time when they're in trouble, that's a problem too. So I mean, it's a crazy high expectation of the local place. I think some people think that Delphi is the size of Baltimore or something. You know what I mean? It's not. And I'm assuming that if you're a corrections officer in that area, you're probably going to go work for the larger place, even if it's a little bit of a drive, because of the financial means that you probably get from working at a larger place down the way versus what you would get at a smaller facility nearby. What are your thoughts?
Well, our court says, and the courts across the country say that this individual can be placed in this position for certain conditions. He met those conditions. It was part of the court order. It's part of the prison systems. If the prison systems stepped outside of what they should have done, they'll be held accountable for that. And they should be. If they did something that was not correct or follows the guideline of feeding him, taking care of him, making sure whatever requirements are met or needed for him to be safe and sustained, yes. Just because you have an individual, and of course, everybody is innocent until proven guilty, but still, the court says that even these people have to have certain standards of their care. And as long as the courts and the jails and the system says, yes, that's acceptable, we're not going to, how are you going to change it? It's not, I can't argue with, all I know is that he's able to go to trial every day and face his accusers, face the state. And if the truth is exposed or if the truth is not, whichever way the truth is, he'll have his day in court to rectify what has happened to him if he's wrongly accused.
Yes, no, I agree. And, but at the same time, like I mentioned before, it's about making sure that he makes it there.
Yes,
and he's safe.
And he made it. I mean, he's there.
Exactly. He's alive. He's there. He didn't, hurt himself. He didn't, to the extent where he took his own life or any of those type of things. And so, and I get it. Some folks, they're thinking that it's torture and it's this and it's that. I mean, what do you guys think Joe is? Like, you're going to go in there, maybe it's because Martha Stewart maybe had a different experience, but Martha Stewart wasn't accused of taking the lives of 2 little girls in the manner that, that Richard Allen has been accused of. And at the end of the day, in the same situation, in the same place, given the same conditions, would they have treated the prisoner the same as Richard Allen? If they had a person coming in who was required to have watch 24/7, and the facility that they were bringing them into couldn't meet those means, then transferring them to the nearest facility that can, I don't see how that's a big problem. Now, I understand that people that don't get what suicide watch is, but they're protecting him from himself. And sometimes, and I know a lot of folks maybe don't understand or comprehend that, because they try to put themselves in Richard Allen's position, which is kind of a dangerous thing to do, because if Richard Allen did do this, do you really think that his mental, capacity or capability of doing things is the same as yours? Do you think his remorse could be the same as yours if he was able to commit something like this? Probably not. And so, you're trying to add reason into probably an unreasonable person's situation. And obviously you're going to come up with solutions that, hey, this isn't right or fair, because if I was in this situation, because I know I wouldn't have done this. It doesn't, that holds no water. at whatsoever. But at the end of the day, if he had gone to a regular prison and gotten his basketball on, and somebody would have taken care of him at that point, I think a lot more people would be a little bit more upset.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
plus we had hearings of that. If he wasn't a threat to the community, if he didn't meet certain qualifiers, he was never been held in the first place.
Right.
And I mean, they had bond hearings. They have this, and he was, he didn't meet the standards. Are there other innocent people that have been held and then later proved innocent? Absolutely. Will we see that in this case? I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. And you know what? At the end of the day, also, if he ends up being found guilty, guess where he's going back?
Yeah.
It's not like, and there's a lot of other people that are there. So it is what it is. But moving on from that, Dr. Monica Walla, was in charge of talking with Richard Allen, communicating with him. She apparently was a true crime fan, and maybe have told some things to Richard Allen while she was seeing him as a doctor. What is your opinion on her work, and how it might affect this case?
Once she realized that it was something that she was knowledgeable with, there's an issue with her.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, step away from it. Don't let your curiosity of being able firsthand that you misused your power, which that's why I see her as a total failure, that whatever she could face, she should face, whatever that is, for the fact that she's not only jeopardized this case in so many ways of creating arguments for the defense and the state. And did she have his treatment of him at heart, or was she trying to get more information? I don't know, but it opens up that door that we're looking at someone that did not do what they swore to do. And the standard for her, I think she's a complete failure. That's just my personal opinion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't like it either. I didn't like it at all. Now, does it make any of the things that she say untrue, or any of those things? Will it affect the case? I'm not sure. From what I understand and what it sounds like is that she was maybe perhaps in the favor of the defense's strategy, while she was talking with him, and was speaking with, and perhaps some more defense friendly YouTubers and creators and social medias and things of that nature. And her communication with him, it sounds like what she was trying to do is give him a little bit of hope. It sounds like he was in this place where he was talking about hurting himself and doing all these things. I find it wrong. She shouldn't have done it. But the fact that she wasn't telling him to confess, she wasn't telling him, hey, you did this, you need to tell somebody what happened. And like I don't know how that'll affect the case.
I don't either. But like I said, I hate that she's put this cloud over the case that each side is going to give great weight one way or the other. And I think it was something that absolutely was unnecessary to have occurred. That, and will she be made an example of? I hope. So that we don't have this occur again.
No, I agree with that. I think it was a huge mistake to have her there. Was in my channel. Maybe she was. I'm not sure. I don't remember hearing my name on or this channel's name on the list of names that of places that she was following. But if she was, she wasn't taking my information, because I don't think I was ever pro Richard Allen's defense side at any point throughout this process. I haven't seen anything that says it's somebody else. I apologize for that, but that's what I haven't seen. But yeah, no, I agree with you. I hope it doesn't have too much of an effect, but I mean, this can even bring up some issues, for appeals. This could be a problems for a while. And so, yeah, I thought it was a huge issue with Miss Walla, Dr. Walla. She's been removed, right? I think some people have said
Yep.
that she's fired. Some people said she's just been removed and put somewhere else.
I believe so.
Yeah, I don't know if she was fired. I think she was just moved to a different spot, right?
I don't know. I've heard both ways. I don't know what the truth is. I mean, you know, if we could have seen it televised, we would have and have a better understanding if she said I was fired or been reassigned or suspended with pay pending investigation or her license being suspended, because I think there's going to be absolutely some repercussions to what occurred.
Right. Right. Well, she's the one that took down the confession where he said that he got spooked by a white van. Now, this white van, and we spoke about it a little bit earlier in the show, at the top of the show, was a huge. It's a huge confession because one, the police didn't take down this information or figure out anything about this white van until after Richard Allen's confession, and two, this would be only something that the killer would know. You know, if they saw a white van driving through there in the middle of at around 2:30 ish. Now I know that there's some questions referencing, you know, the timing in which he got there, that he may have gone to some ATM machines. Um, where do you sit on this confession about the white van?
Well, the timeline, I have an issue with that. Well, the phone was not moved after 2:32, and so this has to do a lot with it. The phone, from my understanding, was underneath one of the victims on the ground. So just because the phone wasn't moved doesn't mean that's the only time that the victim could have been placed there. Or, I mean, it's already on the ground. It doesn't mean that it may have rested there for 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes. So I don't give all the credibility that this is the moment in time of 2:32 or whatever that is. See what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That it'd be one thing if the phone was on top of the victim, but it's under the victim. So we don't have to have absolutely that there was no more movement, because it's hard to move earth. You know, if the phone's on a steady, there's no guarantee that her leg was in contact with it much later or ever. Just because it's under something covered doesn't mean there's contact. And so I have some issues with the exact time frame, that it could have been longer or whatever. And I have issues with the white van as far as would it really spook him? I mean, we walked past, you know, even Richard Allen says he walked past three girls, at least three girls. He was, and that didn't spook him. That if he had this on mind, the three girls that witnessed him walking down the trail didn't spook him to continue if he is the one responsible on his mission of whatever he was going to do. And then he's on the first platform. The witness that came up and saw him, if that's him on the first platform and stating those statements, didn't spook him to stop him from doing what he wants. And so if he's in the commission of a crime with a vehicle driving, and I've been there at that crime scene, and the exact individual that drove by on that day drove by when I was at the crime scene a couple of years ago. And he stopped, and you can see from where he stopped, it's a clear line of sight, several hundred feet, but it's a clear line of sight because he saw us even when there was heavy foliage. He stopped and looked at us at the crime scene. So would it spook him? I think that if he was spooked, it was that, oh, he may have seen me, may have called 911. But being spooked doesn't mean that, oh, I go over here, then I commit this horrible double homicide, and I got to go get some limbs. You know, if you're spooked, you cut them, throw them in the creek, and go.
Right.
You don't, you know, that's in my, like, once again, just speculating, but it makes no sense that I make sure I cut them, make sure that if they're incapacitated, just with a few seconds underwater, you're going to know if they're dead or alive. So his whole story makes no sense to me.
Right.
You know, any of that.
For sure. To me, Richard Allen has had a clear case of minimalization throughout this entire time. the spooking, I think, is a minimalization. If you listen to what he said, he was like, I had no intention on taking their lives. I had an intention to do something else, but I didn't even do that. And it was because I got spooked is the reason why I committed this crime. So I think that there's a huge possibility that this crime was committed already. He may have already
Yeah.
started putting the sticks up there and maybe was, still there until the point where he saw the white van pull by. And then at that point, that's when he got spooked and took off.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, in law enforcement, we're taught, you don't pull your firearm unless you're willing to destroy what's downrange of you.
right.
He pulled that firearm a long time or before the abduction.
Mhm.
And that's been part of the testimony. So at that moment, he was willing, in my mind, and what I have seen of humans and the taking of life is that, that's the thing, is that he's pointing a firearm at us. He's willing to commit a homicide.
Right.
And that decision to commit a homicide was made prior to the abduction,
I agree.
because you don't pull a gun out unless you're willing to start doing something with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I agree. And this entire time he's been trying to minimize his actions, his process, his thoughts and reasoning behind it. He even told his wife something to the effect like, I didn't do everything I said, but I did kill the girls. It is exactly what he had said. And so that was another case of that. So when you have somebody that is minimizing their approach at everything throughout the confessions, obviously there's going to be some things that maybe need some clearing up, because they're not going to quite match quite the same, because he's not being 100% honest. And I'm thinking that's why in this case, to me, I mean, it's clear and obvious, but then again, I've had experience in law enforcement. I've studied criminals, and I've studied their behavior patterns when it comes to like some of the things that they do, as far as like returning to the scene and all the other stuff that everybody knows. But when it comes to like interrogations and talking to somebody and getting through to them, minimalization is one of the things that is brought up, and it's one way to get a beginning part of a conversation going, because then you got to get them open up a little bit more and then a little bit more. But the problem was he was talking to a psychiatrist or to some other folks that maybe weren't trying to get that information out of him. So that's why they were only able to get bits and pieces. But that's just my opinion on those things. But yeah, I think that confession about the white vehicle, the confessions that he has made, I think he even told his mother, why would I say I did this if I didn't do it? Yeah, I just think
There's certain things you lied to mama about. You know, am I guilty of ever lying to my mother? Absolutely, but not that I did something. That, of course, no, I didn't do it.
And so the last thing that I'm going to talk about, and then we're going to get into some questions. So if you guys have some questions, I've already started a few, put a couple of stars in there for us, is what did you think about the fact that the pictures of the victims were put out there for everybody in the courtroom to be seen? The victims' family members were upset because when it came to Richard Allen's actions and what he was doing in the prison and whatnot, that those things were only faced to the jury for his dignity, but the same respect wasn't given to the victims. Where do you see do you have a problem with any of that? Any issues with that? Or is that something that you think is normal practice?
I think it's normal for our culture, and I think we have to see and understand fully that if he's meets probable cause to be in that courtroom, that we as society should see all the evidence. And I hate that for the families, but that's part of what we have to make sure that it's seen by all, so that we have an understanding of that individual's true evil.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, you're right. And One last thing about the phone, because I know a lot of people are bringing it up. I had a little bit of a theory about this. You know, Libby's phone, I guess, ceases to connect to the network at a certain point, and then reconnects at early in the morning hours. Now, my theory is that the service in that area, especially at that time, probably wasn't as good or very great, or maybe not as good as it is now. And my thought is because the phone was underneath the bodies of the victim, maybe it did lose service. But this was February, 4 o'clock in the morning. Near a creek, there's some steam that comes up. Would the moisture in the air possibly impact the serviceability of the phone?
Yeah, and that's probably, and I appreciate it. I don't know who first came up with that thought process that the phone could have possibly been exposed to a certain amount of moisture and went offline
Mhm.
for a little bit. And then once it dried out for whatever reason, it came back on. Sort of like, you know, I had friends that, fortunately, I've never dropped any of my phones in a sink or
Mm,
a lake or anything, but I've had friends that have, and then their phones would come on much later when they threw them in rice or whatever the
mhm,
remedy was, or dried it. I heard that explanation, and that makes more sense than anything. But you know, I of all the things that have been said, I give more credibility to that maybe
mhm,
the phone just got wet to a certain extent, and then contact cleared up enough for it to say, "Oh, let me reboot. We're
mhm.
good."
It's quite possible. I didn't think about that. But that is quite possible when it comes to that. Because there's a lot of folks that like, hey, it doesn't make sense. It's not there.
Yeah, I mean,
Um,
I went all through there. I mean, we did testing as far as our pings, which different technology, different time of year, but we went up there, and our phones, you know, would ping. Um, I would move 10 feet and it said I moved 500 yards. Or
mm,
not all the times were the pings wrong. Sometimes they were absolutely dead on. But the other 2/3 of the time it said I moved 50 feet when I only moved 5 feet, or I moved 5 miles when I didn't move 30 feet. So it
mm.
was absolutely crazy. But we were just doing it with Find My Phone, and the signal was all over, which, like I said, it's probably not comparing apples to apples, but still, that occurred just a couple years ago.
Right. Yeah. So I would expect probably even worse service out there a few years back, more so than that. But all right, ask your questions. I want to thank you, Christina, for your 1999 dealer donation. Hello, Canadian, my friend and mods host Daniel. Hello, Christina. How you doing? Thank you
Very
for
good.
being on the show. Thank you for your your donation and your appreciation and your support. Also, Aquarian One gifted a Turkey Show membership. Became a Drunk Turkey Show member herself today. Want to thank you for that. And let's go on to some of these questions. Lisa asked, did he confess to any details the killer would know prior to the information being released to the public? Kind of went over that a little bit, but I would think the box cutter and um, the white van are probably the biggest things. What do you think?
Yes, the white van by far is the strongest uh, moment for the um, prosecution, and probably will have the confessions, all the confessions, you know,
Mhm,
because that will probably take up I mean, that's a huge part of this whole case, and it's been even in the opening uh, statements by the prosecution. And I see that whoever the jury foreperson is, there will probably be a very lengthy discussion about those confessions. Um,
mm,
with a bullet, uh, you have experts. We don't know what the other side and the expert or what will be brought in regarding the bullet. Um, you've got the witnesses. You've got Richard Allen's testimony. When you take the totality of all of that, of of how Richard Allen's interjected himself into this investigation. The state's best witness so far has been Richard Allen.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you. I agree with you as well. You think he's going to take the stand?
He has an out if he does. That's
Yeah.
his only chance on this. I don't really want to explain why he needs to take the stand, but yes, without him taking the stand, I lean more towards at least a hung jury, if not a conviction.
Got you. That makes sense. We have Tammy asking, with Libby's cuts being vertical, would you think that they were made from behind?
No, that's for me, and that's where I need to see those images and see in which direction were the cuts made. Where is the depth and which way does it? What do I think is the pattern? This is almost as if when I see that type, it's almost as if you would have your hand on their forehead and or because if you're behind them, your natural arm movement is right, left, right, crossways.
Right.
And do we have that? And you can still do the same thing as far as above them. But if they're up and down, that is a very odd angle.
Now, speaking of angle, would you think that the cuts that are available or have seen or been described out there, would those have been made by a person similar height, or would it have been differently if based on the angle, if somebody was taller than Richard Allen, would it have had a different impact or something like that nature?
Well, and I'm thinking about vertical cut in a
Right.
position that the victim would not be standing.
Got
They
you.
would be on their back.
Understood. Made sense.
That's just my personal opinion. That I'm trying to think if I ever seen a vertical cut of someone standing. I've seen horizontals, but never verticals.
Yeah. I haven't myself, but again, my studies were as a police officer. I did police work. I did go to college. I was in criminal justice, so I took some courses relative to that. My goal at one point was to go and be a federal agent, and however, my some injuries took that out of the plan for me. So my information is a little bit limited, which is why I bring the experts on.
Well, but like I said, it's just looking at it, it makes no sense about vertical cuts. I
Right.
mean, if you're from behind, I mean, that is not, you're trying to come, your arm muscles doesn't allow you to pass the shoulders and the arms. If they're trying to struggle with you, you have more of the horizontals first. But now if you're being restrained and on your back, that's a different possibility.
Got you. So do you think that the vertical lines are more of a evidence of potentially somebody being restrained?
Either that total control, absolutely.
Okay. Well, wouldn't that require, so if they were totally restrained, I would assume that even if it was duct tape or clothing or any of those things that were wrapped to tie somebody up or to keep them restrained, wouldn't there be evidence of those things on the wrist, on the ankles?
Like I said, once again, I don't have all the information. You can be unconscious also. There's
Right.
certain things that I don't, you can be
Yeah, it makes
unconscious
sense.
and only for momentarily. And the injuries, it doesn't take a long time to inflict knife wounds
Right.
and those injuries. So even being unconscious, and there's a lot of different ways to be put unconscious. And I don't have the full details of what were found or known about if they were struck, were they smothered, was certain chokeholds applied, because it don't take long to put somebody in that predicament.
So if one of the victims was unconscious, and one of his statements was that he made sure that they had passed, if they were on the ground, then that would explain the vertical cuts. If he was doing that as he said he was
Yes,
ensuring.
that and the placement of the sticks. Think about it. There used to be a serial offender out in California. He was a police officer. Actually, it was a Golden State offender.
Uh-huh.
He would put dishes on the victims while they were alive, so he could go in different parts of the house. And then while they were restrained, if he heard the dishes fall or break, he knew that the victim was moving. And so
That's
was the
interesting.
Yes. And so there's certain things that these offenders do. Did he place the sticks on them to absolutely be able to look at them and watch them from a distance, or for while he was, I mean, there's so many different reasons of why he may be doing that. Is it part of his fantasy? Was it some type of control measure? Don't know.
Interesting. Yeah, you bring up a lot of interesting things that might be a reason why the sticks were there and placed in the manner that they were. To me, my first thought was that he was trying to cover the wounds, because that kind of seemed like where
Yeah, at
the
least
sticks were
one.
placed.
Yeah, the ones across the throat. Yes, there's that possibility. There
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah. And so, but the other thing is to alarm him if they're still alive. That's an interesting take. I've never thought of that. That's very well possible of why they were there, because the position of them would have been, if somebody would have moved, they would have fallen easily.
Yeah.
Tricius asked, sorry if this has been asked, but if the girls were on a slope, wouldn't that make there be some blood run the way it did? I've seen some pictures of the crime scene. In the pictures that I've seen, I don't see blood, but there's a lot of leaves there.
Yeah.
You
It's on a
know,
plateau where I was there now. Of course, water and blood, self-leveling. It's going to go to the lowest point.
right?
So the area they generally now, could they have been in some type of depression and some gentle slope? Yes, but they're not on the slopes of what some parts of that, from my understanding of where I was shown that this is where they were, is not, because some of those inclines, those ridges are extremely steep,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not that type of slope, but typical ground yard. I mean, it's like a plateau of an area, and it's a couple of tiers
Mm-hmm.
of where you're going along, and then the plateau steps up pretty rapidly for about a foot or two, and then it hits another plateau before you get to those ridge lines.
Got you. Yeah. Um, what are your thoughts about the not being able to see blood in those type of pictures? I thought that maybe perhaps some wind blew, like, we don't know when those pictures were taken. There could have been a lot more debris on top of them, like leaves, and they may have taken the leaves off at that point when those pictures were taken. But I think it's pretty possible that some leaves may have blown on top of it, and so we couldn't see what was there. But what are your thoughts on the lack of the visualness there?
Well, I think there was, for the fact that the FBI affidavit, when they did the Logan, they
Mm-hmm.
said that they expected that the offender would have a transfer of some type of cast off, or there would have occurred a substantial amount of blood staining transfers that would have occurred.
Mm-hmm.
And that has to be based on something. And we know
Mm-hmm.
that from the expert that Cesario, or how you pronounce his name, that there was multiple pools of it,
Mm-hmm.
showing that Libby was mobile
Mm-hmm.
from the first, as she went from where the first whatever type of injury that would allow the upside down L to occur, pool occur, to where she was sitting at some point, to where she was finally drugged to. And so they were able to, for him to say testify to that, there had to be evidence of that. I mean, we only have the only pictures I saw, and of course, the ones that's in the courtroom would be able to speak of it more. But when you're looking at blood patterns and blood trails on leaves, it's not like you're looking at it as what we did with Kohlberger on clean white sheets and or carpet or a controlled environment. You're looking at a multiple colored surface, these leaves, grass, and so it may not be as plain or as easy to identify the full pooling.
Gotcha. That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. Serene says they're closing the facility. That's how bad it is. He was in there for more than a year. Buildings get closed, buildings get built. It's what happens. I mean, at the end of, when I first started my police career, we were in a building that was supposed to be torn down. And once we got the funds to get the new one, we did. That's just the way it works. Maybe
I worked in a facility that was built probably in the 30s, and we were there in the 80s, 50 years. And there were sections of it that you would think, man, this is almost like what it's out down in Florida, the oldest jail in the country.
Yeah.
Or something.
Yeah. No, I agree. But, maybe not so many defund polices, and maybe they can get these up to the state of art, equipment and things like that. But when you take money away from the police, or law enforcement, this is an outcome. Serene says the descriptions by the three girls didn't match RA in any way. They also didn't match each other. And so that's why witness testimony is one of the most least reliable that there is. They all described the same event. They had pictures of themselves on a bench that gave a time mark. And so Richard Allen had himself there and described three juveniles walking past him. The juveniles that they described, the person that they described, they all said the same event, that one of their friends said hello and the person walked by without saying anything to them. So they all were experiencing the same event. But eyewitness testimony is it's not that reliable. And this should be one of the big clear things or indicators of that. Let's see. So Tammy asks a question, says, is it a problem that in 2017, Weber, he said he got home at 3:30 to 3:40 and was driving his Subaru? I think that's one of the big things that people are questioning. I'm not necessarily certain if it was his Subaru or whatnot, but I do think that he had stated he had worked on some ATMs back in the day. And now he's not saying that those things that's not true. What are your thoughts on the flip-flop?
Well, and this is what I was speaking of at the beginning of the show, that through the failure of law enforcement, this may be one of the biggest things that possibly will lead to the conviction of Richard Allen, is law enforcement's mistake of not recording, documenting, because if at that time, when they were interviewing Weber, it would have been at a point that he would have been a person of interest. The abduction happened next to a property where he was checking on, where his family lived, a place that he was very, he knew the ins and outs and knew everything about it. And he puts himself there. So law enforcement should have looked at him from the standpoint of what was you wearing that day? What vehicle were you in? And how do we prove, where were you working? Is there cameras there? Where did you stop at a store? Are there cameras there? Are you working on ATMs? Let's go look at the videos on the ATMs. That if those things occurred, that should have been part of his investigation. What vehicle you was in? Can we get a consent to search that vehicle? Let's look. Is there any evidence of anything? But through their lack of doing that, it's turned out to be open the door of that he is. Weber is saying that he was in his white van, which is what Richard Allen says passed him by that day.
Mhm.
And so, which way this was turned out, I mean, it's so ironic that the one failure has turned into be possibly the one greatest thing that may lead to a conviction for him.
I agree with that, because I think if it was in there and it was part of his discovery and he said that after the fact, then
Yeah.
you can say, hey, he knew about that there. So yeah, that's huge. That definitely is one of the biggest parts of this that's going to end up leading to his potential conviction. Afton says Nick made that decision. He could have published those photos straight to the jury. I'm assuming that's the victims' photos. Maybe. I don't know. I don't know how many people wanted to see little kids in that manner. Mark comes in with a 99-cent super chat. Thank you so much for super stickers. Thank you so much, Mark. We have the Sissy coming in with everyone. Make sure you hit that like button. All right. So I'm going to get back in here real quick, see if anybody asked anything real fast. What do you think about the reports about the destroyed interviews being updated? So are they going to be able to what do you mean by updated? Did they figure out a way to pull them up? I don't know if they did.
I hadn't heard. I know that the defense is going on. Wouldn't you think it'd be a good idea to go back and when you first discovered within months of to re-update those interviews? I agree with them. Good point. Valid point.
Yeah. You know, to me, the fact that they're missing, I think that it would be an issue if it was just this case, right? But I think that it's clearly it was the entire law enforcement wide agency wide issue there. It wasn't just this situation that was getting not recorded. There was multiple others, and so I think that kind of leads you to know that hey, things happen. Nothing's perfect. Unfortunately, it just
I've been there.
happened.
I've been there. I've had. I think I know of at least one of lost interview with a confession that without my notes, I would have been in bad trouble. But you do have that everything works and through the transcripts but that was back in the day where you took the tape and handed to someone to transcribe, and then everything gets lost and you're done. Been there, done that.
Yeah. Things happen. Things get lost. Things have to be redone. Interviews have to be redone. It's part of life. I mean, if you go by life and expect everything to be 100% accurate, 100% your way all the time, you might want to check yourself because you might be in heaven, because that's not real down here. Afton says, how often do inmates win lawsuits for Eighth Amendment violations? I don't really, I think that it's happened, maybe a few times, but I don't think it's as common as what most people would think, I guess. But those have happened. I'm sure of it.
Yeah.
Let's see. How do you explain the lack of blood splatter evidence for an outside crime scene?
I don't know if there is a lack of it. I mean, I haven't seen it, and so I don't know on what just from the testimony and the recreations of the artists that did that and the discussions that we have the F tree, and then we have the images of and like I said, I've always said that the images I saw of that were released way back, I don't know how accurate, don't know if they were Photoshopped, but you could, especially with Libby, you could see the blood spatter. But it was just, you're looking at two images of two victims that were taken in 250th of a second shutter speed, if that's a shutter speed that they used, but in that moment in time. And so you can't really tell what else is going on from that angle and that intermediate Photoshop, because law enforcement is going to have overall intermediates, close-ups, videos, 3D imaging, whatever they did or didn't do.
Mark asks, the ME said there was a mark under Libby's chin consistent with some kind of restraint, but there was no tape residue. The assailant did have access to 2 pairs of female undergarments. I did hear about that there was something that appeared to be that there was something there on the lips at one point. What are your
When I
thoughts there?
saw those images, that was one of the reasons I never disclosed anything about that case and those images, because
Mhm.
there was something there around her chin and mouth that I could not identify.
Mm,
Um, and of course I could not and would not talk about it at that time.
right. Right. And so one of the things I think people are questioning is the one man, theory. And how could he restrain 2 people and be by himself and keep them there, maybe even tie them up, or as Mark theorized there that maybe potentially he had utilized some of their undergarments as restraints. Uh how plausible is that for one person to do?
The lack of, the lack of defensive injuries, absolutely something that and even the other expert, Cesario, that's just something that both of us agree on.
Hmm.
Didn't know it at the time, but he also has those same things that makes no sense to him, how certain blood patterns and how could they succumb to these injuries without restraints or unconscious or restrained, um, uh, because there's a difference between restraints and restrained, because or you got clothing being used as restraints versus someone else holding, um, and or being unconscious, and just don't know.
Well, didn't I may have heard this wrong, but I thought I heard or read somewhere that there was damage to one of the victims' heads, like internally. Like, is that true?
Um, I don't know. I have heard that also. I don't know how true. I didn't see it in the testimony of the pathologist that I know of. It may be out there. I just hadn't seen it.
Got you, got you. Because that would make a difference as to why she didn't fight back if she was unconscious, if she was cut while unconscious and she began to bleed out. Those things would make sense in those directions, in that avenue. But when it comes to Libby, yeah, I mean, if there's something that was there, you know, I, I go back to BTK. BTK would have his victims restrain each other. And that's the kind of power that somebody has when they have the weapon, and what fear can do to other people. So I think that's quite possible that maybe perhaps something like that was happening, or something to that nature. I'm not sure how much of a restraint can be put on there. I mean, maybe the fact that there's a lack of um, a lot of stuff, maybe that's an indication that somebody didn't do, I guess, a greatest job of restraining them. I'm not sure.
Yeah. Even Zodiac did the same thing with the male and female on the bank of the lake.
Hmm.
Um, he had the female tie up the male victim,
Hmm.
and then he had to redo it because he didn't do a real good job at it.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So, in my opinion, I think that's quite a possibility there. Trying to put reason in a situation that's unreasonable is dangerous, because there's no reason or sense to this. And so, my last question for you, Steve, is the state here has rested. So, I don't anticipate that there being much more that the state is going to be bringing up against Richard Allen. I think everything is going to be to counteract whatever the defense may say. So at this point, with the state already resting, do you think that they have done enough to prove Richard Allen's guilt?
If in their closing, it's all going to be depend on how the prosecutor ties it all together of what he promised from his opening statement to making them making that jury understand the importance of those confessions,
Mm.
and of the timeline of the witnesses. If they if the prosecutor has a well-received closing, yes, they can pull it through. But then again, we also have to see if what the defense is bringing to the table. They may knock it out of the park. It's going to take the defense to pull up and knock it out of the park. I know it that the state has to prove and that the defense doesn't have to do anything. But I think that if the defense doesn't absolutely step up to the plate and attack everything the best witness has brought to this case, being Richard Allen, because everything is from Richard Allen's mouth right now. You know, I was there. I don't know how I don't know how my bullet got there. I don't, but right now, if the defense doesn't knock it out of the park, I can easily see a conviction.
I do too. I think that the state has done their part. I think that the defense has an avenue. I think that they took a big, huge blow when it came to not being able to present the odinist theory and those type of things. I think if those things were prevalent, I think that might have made my decision a little bit harder to make.
But I wasn't happy about that. I wanted that stuff. I think that for the prosecution to win out on this, I think that everything should be brought and that the evidence should stand on its own. Juries are smart, they'll understand it. I don't like this about that you can't, the sticks got there some way, and they said that hands placed them there. Whose hands? You even have the prosecution's CSI guy says that they could have been restrained, not restraints, but restrained. Personally, I think that, and this, like I said, my opinion matters not, but I think that does open the door that, well, we should look at, is it more than one? Because there's some officers right now think that that's still a viable option. I do too. But Richard Allen says it was him alone.
Yeah, he definitely did. Officers thought there was more than one person for the longest time. They themselves said that the scene was staged, so it wasn't done. It wasn't a natural scene, that he didn't just leave it there. So things were moved on purpose. To me, if they don't have hard evidence of Brad Holder or Westfall or any of the other persons that they've named personally, this is the trial for Richard Allen, not the trial of those guys. And so the evidence, unless there's something that ties them to the scene and to the case, I see the point there. Now, what I don't disagree with, or what I do disagree with, is the fact that the nature of potentially bringing out that this is a religious or a sacrificial something, maybe not specifically bring out the players that they suspect at this point, because they may have alibis. They've already been cleared. But if you can say, hey, just because those 3 or 4 individuals didn't do it themselves, doesn't mean that somebody else that's associated with some sort of ritualistic type of ceremonies that would include something similar to what we have here. And I think that should have been left in there. In there, the fact that if they can get an expert to show that this is, clearly a ritual based on, there's this clear symbol here, there's that clear symbol there, but I just don't see that they've been able to do that yet.
Yeah, and that's the thing as far as rituals, that if we're looking at an offender that has some type of fantasy, he's going to have a ritual that he's doing for his own personal satisfaction, his own fantasy.
That's true.
So rituals are the definition of, everybody has their own definition of what does ritual mean. It doesn't always take multiple people to have a ritual. An individual offender can have a ritual or a modus operandi, whatever.
Right. Exactly. Well, Steve, I want to thank you so much for joining us tonight. It was a great talk and conversation. I think we understand a little bit better about the whole serrated knife and box cutter and the possibility of how that goes. Thank you for that. I do have one comment here that came up. It says, Steve, I am neighbors with Chris. I remember you taking your wife and putting her through recreation. She is a trooper. Thank you for all your service for us, and to this day. And so, a lot of love and respect coming out of the chat for you. They really do appreciate when you come on here. So, thank you again. Do you have any final words to let everybody know where they can find you?
I have a True Crime Web on YouTube. That's my channel. Appreciate all the support that we have. We also work cold cases across the country that while I do create content regarding cases that such as this one regarding Richard Allen and Abby and Libby, that through that content, it helps support my True Crime Web Foundation, which is investigative, and we work with cold case families that we do not create content on until a certain point of where it's in the judicial system.
Yes, sir. Go check it out. A lot of good stuff that he's doing, traveling, doing great content. So that way we, the common folk who don't have the experience and expertise in some of these things, can understand what it means and how it matters in the case. Again, this is his channel. Make sure you guys go check it out. It is at True Crime Web. Hit the subscribe button. Let him know that we sent you guys. Again, thank you again so much, Steve. For everybody else, you guys have a great night. Thank you for everybody that participated and had questions. Until next time, peace.